What is up, people? I guess this is another episode of the weekly show, but I'm dedicating this entire show to talking about DEATHGRIP 2. So I've watched the video twice now in the past couple days. I've even gone back to watch DEATHGRIP 1. I'll start by saying the movie is like an incredible feat of cinematography and writing. It definitely got me fired up, and some of the visuals they were able to pull off in this film are absolutely insane. But I think as a package, it honestly didn't hit as hard as the old one, and kind of like didn't leave me as fired up as I kind of was expecting. Like, I would still give the video like a positive review, and you should absolutely go out and buy it. As a mountain biker, I think it's such a treat to have a full-length film to sit down and enjoy. It's definitely still a must-watch, but for better or for worse, I am cursed with a bit of an analytical mind when it comes to mountain bike videos. I've spent a lot of time making them myself, and I've been nerding out on this stuff for over a decade, coming up close to 2. So let's see, where to start? So I think my biggest critique with this film is that it just felt a little slow for some reason. I kind of felt myself zoning out at times. I was maybe like looking for something like exciting to happen, or just the pacing of the film didn't really keep me gripped or like on the edge of my seat. So I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and I'll theorize on many of them. But I think maybe the biggest is just the shot length. I went back and watched DEATHGRIP 1 and, just comparing it to a lot of other bike videos. I think the shot length was fairly long. I think it's a combination of these drone shots, slow-mo clips, and having most of the segments have 3 riders. It just takes a longer shot to get all 3 riders through the frame, especially if you're doing a slow-mo shot. And I think it's harder to do quick takes with drones. So you need to like kind of get through a whole shot, and usually it's like showing a longer part of the line. All that mixed together, I just think the shot length was a little long. That may have actually been fine, but I think there's some other things that kind of play into why the whole package kind of felt a little slow to me. And I think a big part of what I'm gonna talk about for the rest of this video has to do with the builds of the tracks. So they had custom builds for most every segment, and I just think the builds didn't really like showcase the skills or the type of riding that I wanted to see, and I think that made it feel a little stale. Pretty much all these builds have like a bike park feel, like a bike park flow trail type of feel with big jumps and big berms, and I think there was just like less really dynamic features and really less like trail riding. I think what I love so much about Brendan's riding is some of the ways he's able to interpret trail. Like, he has such a sick skill set being a downhill racer, and also has like the sickest style on jumps and just reads terrain in such a sick way. So I don't think him or a lot of the other riders that he had on the set were able to like, I don't know, just do stuff that was like really unique and engaging, because the trail was just like not that inspiring. When I look back to the original DEATHGRIP, there was just some like really dynamic features, and even though they had a lot of custom builds in that movie too, there was way more like downhill tracks or just like trails where Brendan was able to do really stylish stuff on really demanding terrain, and that's the stuff that really gets me excited. And I think the riding and the shots in this just became slightly repetitive, because I feel like we were seeing a lot of similar type of features. It's like you can only rip a bike park berm so hard and in so many ways, especially having like Omri Piron and a selection of like the other top World Cup racers in the world. Yes, they can ride this type of trail well, but I would have loved to see their skills showcased on stuff that was a little more technical and on terrain they could interpret in like a creative way. And I think showcasing that is like a bit more inspiring or engaging, or at least I would have appreciated a little bit more variety. It looked like a lot of these builds were fairly short lengthwise, and they didn't have a ton of features top to bottom. And then you combine that with the film crew having, you know, some new toys to play with, like this super slow-mo FPV drone. The GoPros have gotten a lot better. And then, you know, your standard tight slow-mo shots and all the different angles you can get on these features, but like having a limited amount of features to film. When you start to go to put together a segment, I think to make it a full segment, they ended up having to use a lot of different angles and clips of the same features. I think that contributed to it kind of feeling like a little stale later on in the segments. You're like, okay, I've seen that jump now, you know, for the fourth time. And I think it also hurt the segments from a continuity perspective. I think this is maybe another one of my main critiques, especially in the first two segments, is I was really confused about what was going on a lot of the times. Like, for example, in the first one, you know, Omri and Brandon would be ripping together, then it would be like a shot of one of them alone, then they'd be together again, then it would be a shot of someone in the air, and it's like, I don't know where on the track this is, I don't know what jump it is, and then it would cut to something kind of unrelated to that clip. So there were good sequences of clips stacked together. I feel like to build energy through a video and get really immersed in the riding, I feel like it really helps to have continuity in the film. That's something you see in Brandon Semnick's videos and that he's like super anal about. Each shot builds on each other. At least there's an illusion of a linear timeline through a trail through the whole video. And this one, it felt more of kind of like a visual montage of bangers, which was cool, but it was hard to kind of engage myself in the riding in that way. And sometimes it just left me like a little flustered and caught off guard. And it was kind of hard to process what was happening. And, you know, even in the Madeira segment with Thomas Janot, it's like they bounce around. I think there were like 3 different locations on that shoot, kind of crisscrossed through all of them pretty randomly, in my opinion. It's like, all right, we're back crisscrossing in the goalie. Now we're hitting jumps. Now we have this zoomed in shot of a berm. I have no idea where this is. There was no setup shot to the berm. We're just tight into slow-mo. It's like, all right, that shot was sick. And then it's like, okay, well, now we're back flipping on a big jump somewhere without like a lead-in shot. So it was like, again, very impressive visually, but I think just hard to process when we're revisiting those features just at different times in the video. I think that's where it's like, okay, I've seen this jump, you know, it's like, and it kind of gets slightly repetitive. A quick note on that Madeira segment though, I actually saw that segment of trail in person when I went to race Trans Madeira in the fall of 23, and all that stuff is way huger in person. Like, that line is sick as fuck. And yeah, standing on some of those lips, and especially that like crossover road gap that Brendan did, it was like, damn, this is no joke. And it's just an example of like everything in the movie is actually way gnarlier in person. You know, while we're on this crisscrossing segment, I think that's another thing, you know, that with the builds, it's like the crisscrossing is sick, and the way they pulled it off, especially in the Madeira segment and in the French segment as well, is like really impressive. But I do think it gets kind of old. Like, I would have loved to see more individual shots. I don't know if like having all that crisscrossing and multiple lines like took away from the builds. I mean, to make trails that do that and do that well has got to be like so hard to pull off. I wonder like maybe that kind of took away from like the variety and quality of the builds in another aspect. But regardless, I would have loved to see more individual rider shots. I think, yes, it's cool to see the riders crisscrossing, but in those shots, it's like, I don't think you're getting the best visual of what that rider is doing. And it's more of like the novelty of having the riders shoot over each other in all these crazy ways. I think there's definitely a place for that. But I think as a whole, I kind of missed just like seeing that one rider showcase what they've got, you know, and link together a section of trail that's just focused on them. Like the Brandon Semnick Utah segment in Death Grip 1, has some of the most horny shots. And I think it still created a good vibe of them riding together, but it really was able to highlight each rider on their own. And I think there was less of that in DEATHGRIP 2. And I think with the caliber of rider that they got on these shoots, I would have loved to see like each rider kind of riding in their element with the focus of the video and the editing all on them. And I think a big reason of like getting some of these repetitive shots and maybe even some of these longer shots is this super slow-mo FPV drone. And this is a tough one because I think some of the shots that this thing got were absolutely nuts. Like what this filmer drone guy did with that thing was incredibly impressive. But I think when you get these like insane FPV shots, it's like, okay, like how are we not gonna use this, you know? And I think the problem is like you've already got a bunch of other shots of this same feature. It can be kind of disorienting to be kind of in this third person on the ground view, which you can relate to. And then, you know, all of a sudden you're in the air on Brendog's rear wheel. You're like, okay, I don't know. As a package of an entire segment, I think maybe it was overused, but I also don't blame them for using it because it's like, how are you not when you have this like kind of groundbreaking FPV footage? So I'm kind of torn on that. It's not that I'm not like an FPV hater, but I do think it changes the dynamic, the flow, the pacing of an edit. And I think it makes it really challenging to balance. It is kind of like harder to get that like continuity with it. It is like a very hard perspective change. And you know, another critique that I have that kind of plays in with like the pacing and the whole feel of the video is the music. This is 100% a taste thing. And I listened to the podcast, The Ride Companion. I mean, they pretty much said like they're hyped on the music. They love it. And, you know, as a passion project, I think that's kind of the attitude you got to have is like, hey, this is the stuff that I'm stoked on. And like, you guys can kind of deal with it. If you like it, cool. If you don't, oh well. And so I can appreciate that, but at least for me, the soundtrack didn't really land, and a lot of times it just felt like it was slow and it wasn't really like carrying the energy of the video. So moving on to some of the more positive takes from this film, you know, again, I did like the film. I'll kind of touch on some of the riding highlights. Chaos and Finn on that last segment was absolutely nuts. Fricks is the freaking GOAT. Like, that dude looks so sick on the bike. And we did get like a handful of shots or a good sequence of Fricks just doing his shit. And I would have loved to see more of that. Also, the mud shots in the French segment were some of my favorite of the film. Shit flying everywhere, they're drifting. And again, it just wasn't like jumps and berms, you know? It was something a little bit more dynamic and interesting than that. Oh, one I forgot to mention as well was like the Luca slow-mo at Leger. I thought like the Luca and Brendan segment in Leger was maybe one of the sicker ones because of how they filmed it. It had great continuity from start to finish, and they were riding, you know, a World Cup track. On the other hand, it was like, you know, I don't know if a World Cup track is like the best platform for Brendan and Luca to like look their best on the bike because it's like actually super gnarly. I do think like the pacing of that and the concept was pulled off really well. I think it could have been really corny if it wasn't done correctly, but Rob Warner killed it and I think they pulled it off. So my last point here is I would have loved to see just a Brendog segment. The movie is Brendan Fairclaw's DEATHGRIP, and I don't think these guys are going to make another one. At least that's the vibe I got from listening to the podcast. I would have loved for like the last segment to be just Brendan and him like shut it down and do a build somewhere that was just like his ultimate track that showcased the depth of his skill on the bike and kind of just put a stamp on the whole movie, because it is his movie. And I feel like in a lot of segments, he kind of took the back seat. This was a Brendan Fairclaw movie. I'm like the biggest fan of Brendan Fairclaw, and I don't think I saw like the best degree of his riding. So by now it probably sounds like I hated this movie, but I promise you I don't. I've watched it twice and I did enjoy it each time, but thinking through the video in a bit greater detail and just having kind of an analytical mind about this whole thing, you know, it didn't quite hit home the way I wanted it to. I'm a huge Brendan Fairclough fan and a fan of pretty much the whole crew that made this video. If you've been following the weekly show, I've picked a lot of Brendan Fairclough videos as my like old school mountain bike video pick for the week. And I'm coming into this with a positive Brendan bias. Like, I want to love this film. I just think for me, it kind of missed in a few areas that prevents it from like really hitting home in the way that I wanted it to. The whole biking world is much better off for having this movie, and I'm thankful that they put it together. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on this whole deal. So anyway, I think that's about all I got for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Am I out on left field here? I think overall the reception to the video that I've seen has been really positive, and I kind of feel like a dick for picking it apart in the way I just did. But I think that's what I'm here for, to add a little bit of a different perspective from like an analytical video point of view. So don't tear me apart, guys. You know, I don't want to just be a hater, fan of the movie. I think you should go watch it. I'll put a link to it in the description. But yeah, that's all I got. I'll catch you guys in the next one.